dijeron que el mundo es la tumba de los que piensan que están vivos. Aquí se cultiva el cuerpo y el corazón es alimento de los perros. Nos enseñaron que las estaciones son 4, pero que ninguna nos pertenece. Aprendimos del dolor cuando caímos sobre un cactus que en lugar de espinas corta con amantes que se van sin volver la vista.
The next day, another turn came and and so it continued always the same. Coitus, Christ, curses, ejaculation, always the same. The next day another turn came, and so it continued always the same. Coitus, Christ, curses, ejaculation, always the same. The next day another turn came, and so it continued always the same. Coitus, Christ, curses, ejaculation, always the same. The next day another turn came, and so it continued always the same. Coitus, Christ, curses, ejaculation, always the same. The next day another turn came, and so it continued always the same. Coitus, Christ, curses, ejaculation, always the same. The next day another turn came, and so it continued always the same. Coitus, Christ, curses, ejaculation, always the same. The next day another turn came, and so it continued always the same. Coitus, Christ, curses, ejaculation, always the same. The next day another turn came, and so it continued always the same. Coitus, Christ, curses, ejaculation, always the same. The next day another turn came, and so it continued always the same. Coitus, Christ, curses, ejaculation, always the same. The next day another turn came, and so it continued always the same. Coitus, Christ, curses, ejaculation, always the same. The next day another turn came, and so it continued always the same. Coitus, Christ, curses, ejaculation, always the same. The next day another turn came, and so it continued always the same. Coitus, Christ, curses, ejaculation, always the same. The next day another turn came, and so it continued always the same. Coitus, Christ, curses, ejaculation, always the same. The next day another turn came, and so it continued always the same. Coitus, Christ, curses, ejaculation, always the same. The next day another turn came, and so it continued always the same. Coitus, Christ, curses, ejaculation, always the same. The next day another turn came, and so it continued always the same. Coitus, Christ, curses, ejaculation, always the same. The next day another turn came, and so it continued always the same. Coitus, Christ, curses, ejaculation, always the same. The next day another turn came, and so it continued always the same. Coitus, Christ, curses, ejaculation, always the same. The next day another turn came, and so it continued always the same. Coitus, Christ, curses, ejaculation, always the same. The next day another turn came, and so it continued always the same. Coitus, Christ, curses, ejaculation, always the same. One of the old women tied the daily victim onto the machine. He then was informed and went into the boudoir, masturbating a bit in front of her vagina, swearing, cursing, and began to fuck let out screams of lust, and from the moment of ejaculation began to roar like a bull. He walked out not even looking at the woman, and repeated this 3 to 4 times on the same day with the same. The next day another turn came, and so it continued always the same. Coitus, Christ, curses, ejaculation, always the same. The next day another turn came, and so it continued always the same. Coitus, Christ, curses, ejaculation, always the same. The next day another turn came, and so it continued always the same. Coitus, Christ, curses, ejaculation, always the same. The next day another turn came, and so it continued always the same. Coitus, Christ, curses, ejaculation, always the same. The next day another turn came, and so it continued always the same. Coitus, Christ, curses, ejaculation, always the same. The next day another turn came, and so it continued always the same. Coitus, Christ, curses, ejaculation, always the same. The next day another turn came, and so it continued always the same. Coitus, Christ, curses, ejaculation, always the same. The next day another turn came, and so it continued always the same. Coitus, Christ, curses, ejaculation, always the same. The next day another turn came, and so it continued always the same. Coitus, Christ, curses, ejaculation, always the same. The next day another turn came, and so it continued always the same. Coitus, Christ, curses, ejaculation, always the same. The next day another turn came, and so it continued always the same.